for example, the vaccines, when the pandemic hit, Saudi Arabia did an amazing job, did an incredible job. If we were not aware of how important data is, how important research is, Saudi Arabia would have not done what it had done. But it was aware. It was a priority. Our population is a priority. Numbers are a priority. Data is a priority. So this was like the end result. It went perfectly, and I think the goal is to have more of this reaction throughout.
This is the 966.
This is the 966, episode 74. In just a few moments, actually, we will be joined by Dr. Doaa Alsaleh, a medical doctor, a physician scientist at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York. Just so fun to talk with her. She's going back to Saudi soon to start working back in her home country. Just a really fun conversation. And we were unable to ask her any of our personal medical questions on air. Like, why does my lower back hurt? Yeah. But just a awesome conversation. We thank her so much for her time. And Richard, we will be back to the full format next week. This week, we will only be doing the yellow segment after the conversation. We did just want to jump right into the conversation with Doaa, Dr. Doaa, who's just great. So
Dr. D, yeah, she's wonderful. And she's done some impressive things, and I think she's going to do some impressive things in Saudi. It's going to be fun to watch. And maybe in the future, we'll have her come back and tell us about all the things she's done over there.
Yeah, she's got as we discussed, the 966 tattoo, which is you cannot remove it. Even for the best doctors can't remove it. So we hope to have her back and to see her again after she spent some time over there. So that was great. Richard, before we get going and before we jump into that conversation, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you're getting it. The numbers are doing very, very well. The new subscribers we got, especially after last week's conversation with Bechtel Managing Director Jake Mumm, was really nice to see. So welcome to all of our new listeners who are now listening to us for the second time. We appreciate you being here. But yes, hit the subscribe button if you haven't.
It never hurts when Bechtel Corp puts it on their LinkedIn, site, and right at the lead are 966 with Jacob Mumm to their 84,000 followers.
No. 850,000 followers.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
I missed a zero?
Yeah, you missed a zero. We saw that. I was like, whoa, that's so cool. They're such a great company. So that was definitely really good to see. And thank you to Jake for joining us. That was such an awesome discussion. Actually, if you have not listened to that and you missed it somehow, go to our YouTube page. We have that full interview there, as well as now some segments that he discussed on the Metro and Jubail and some others. So it's just, I mean, he was so good and the conversation was so good. So yeah, we appreciate that very much.
And that's the beauty of that YouTube channel, is that you can get the whole shebang or you can get bits and pieces of it. It's really nice.
Yeah. Speaking of New York City, I mean, you don't always eat the whole pizza. Sometimes it's nice to have just a slice and then you're not so full. But we do get a lot of feedback, Richard, from people that listen to the whole episode. And actually, before we get in, sorry to keep dragging this intro out, but we did get a really good question from a very frequent listener, Mr. Bill Connor, who asked what the difference is between a giga and mega project, since we seem to interchange the words just a little bit, and it's actually quite a confusing topic. And Richard, I know you know the difference.
Well, because I went down that rabbit hole, on the gigas, but at the time I didn't really distinguish between the giga and megas, which is an oversight on my part. But yes, there is a difference, and my understanding is that giga is 10 billion plus. Mega is a mere billion plus.
So until the world population reaches 10 billion people, we cannot be a giga podcast with our giga audience. We're going to have to settle for mega. But yes, great question, Bill. And we love, there's so much feedback that comes in, Richard, from YouTube and email and, oh my gosh, from every direction. Yeah. But there was a great question from Bill who's often in Riyadh. So thank you, Bill.
And a big fan of ours, and an OG, original gangster fan.
The original gangster fan, yeah. But the fam has really expanded here, so it's cool. But yeah, just send us questions or, any ideas for topics or introductions to potential guests. We love getting all that stuff. We don't love as much getting some of the criticism, but we will take it. We are very thick-skinned, Richard. Just be civil to others in the comment section of the YouTube page. A reminder for that as well. Okay, let's jump right into our conversation now with Dr. Doaa Alsaleh. Joining us today on the 966 is Dr. Doaa Alsaleh, a medical doctor and physician scientist at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, New York City. Dr. Doaa was born in Saudi Arabia, got her medical degree in Bahrain, and is now in pursuit of a PhD on top of her medical doctor degree at the prestigious Mount Sinai Hospital System. We are excited to learn about your journey and what's next. Dr. Doaa, welcome to the 966.
Hi, and thank you for having me. Reporting from the Upper East Side, Manhattan. I am Doaa Alsaleh. I'm a physician scientist. Thank you for introducing me. I'm a physician scientist in New York, Icahn School of Medicine, Mount Sinai. I graduated, like you said, from Bahrain. That's where I got my MD or medical degree from. I can tell you more about this as we go. But again, thank you for having me and introducing me.
Our pleasure.
We're very excited that you're joining us. And is it Dr. D, by the way?
Oh, you can call me Dr. D too.
A friend of ours referred to you as Dr. D. So you're in that pantheon of people who just go by, like Pele or
No, it's funny. The nickname D. When I first moved to New York, it was, Doaa. It is actually pronounced Doaa. So there is a letter that's not in the English alphabet. So it was a little bit difficult for people to pronounce. They'd call me Doaa. And funny thing, Doaa or Doaa in Arabic means medication. So I'm like, okay, I'm a doctor.
Doctor.
I can go for that. But then people were like, we're just gonna call you D. I'm like, okay, if that's easy. I'm very flexible, and I like it. It sounds cool,
Well, Dr. D has nice alliteration. It sounds very good.
I agree.
Yeah. So it's from here on out, it's Dr. D. But we are really pleased you're on the show, and we want to hear your story and your journey. You're very young, so there's many chapters to come, but we want to get past, present, and future, because what you're going back to in Saudi Arabia is really exciting to hear about too. But if you can elaborate a little bit on what you're doing now, and you do use a specific phrase, which I love, physician scientist, and that reflects both your multiple degrees, but also what you sort of want to hope to do with those degrees. So can you tell us a little bit, expand a little bit on what you're doing now up in New York and at Mount Sinai?
Right. So I'll go back a little bit to the term physician scientist and what it actually means, and then I'll elaborate more on what I'm currently doing. So for those who are listening to us, if you go to med school, you graduate with an MD degree, medical degree. Usually, the track is to go purely into a clinician track, which is doing residency, fellowship, and having clinical duties thereafter, right? Specializing in a certain specialty and doing like full-time clinical job, maybe plus doing some research, but not specializing in research. And then there's the other path, which is being a scientist. Now, a scientist, you can specialize in preclinical science, like the basic sciences in medicine. You can specialize in research. There are like literally unlimited number of different sciences that undergoes that category, right? So when I graduated med school, I, like any medical student, had different specialties in mind. You don't really know exactly what you're going to specialize in unless you have both knowledge of how this looks and does it suit you. Do you think it be of any benefit in the future? So that's where I being a physician scientist or going into that science track started. And I chose clinical research. So it's the clinical part of research and not preclinical. And that is what I'm currently doing right now. So I currently work on big databases, registries, like the statewide registries. They're mandatory registries, specifically in the area of open heart surgery. So cardiology, open heart surgery. I look at data in regards to outcomes of different surgical procedure for cardiac patients, look at outcomes and try to understand and improve the outcomes of these patients who undergo, for example, certain procedures like open heart surgery, like CABG. So in short, my specialty is in outcomes and implementation research, as well as clinical trials and the clinical research side, or science of clinical research.
When we were chatting beforehand, you mentioned that you were pretty conversant with AI. Are you applying some AI to this data?
Yes. Yes. So I do a lot of predictive modeling. And predictive modeling or machine learning is like under the umbrella of AI. For example, I'd be looking at data and into predicting, having an outcome in mind, say, for example, death or hospital length of stay, and calculating that outcome, predicting that outcome from these data. So this is like a very simple example of what it is to do, like machine learning, predictive modeling. So I do that in my area of research as well.
Fascinating. We should get to the basics. Where were you born in Saudi?
I was born in Bahrain, the eastern part of Saudi Arabia. Have you
Which
been to
makes
Saudi?
sense. It makes sense because one of the reasons I think it's fascinating in your story that you got your medical degree at the Arabian Gulf University. It's not that's not it, and then you're here at a prestigious U.S. Hospital and School of Medicine. That's not a normal path necessarily, and I'm interested on that. So you just went right across the causeway to get your MD. Where'd you
Yeah.
do your undergraduate work?
It was in Bahrain as well. So it was in the Arabian Gulf University. The program was unique. It was problem-based learning where you do undergrad and then you take an exam called BSc or Bachelor of Sciences, which is the undergrad compared to the US. And then once you pass that exam, which is after 4 years of the basic medical sciences degree, which is the bachelor, after you pass that exam, then you move to the MD, which is the remaining years, and then you take a big exam called an MD where you get your MD degree. Yeah, so it was just across the causeway. But I lived in Bahrain. I lived because it was just exhausting going back and forth, although I live like our home is very
Right.
close to Bahrain. But yeah.
Are we going to see more of that? And I say that because one of the things we talk about on the 966 on a regular basis is how sort of across the board in Saudi Arabia, but we'll include Bahrain there too. Universities, academic institutions are really raising their profile. And when you have global indices and metrics and that sort of thing, you see a lot more of these Saudi universities and regional universities being listed and rising in the rankings. So, for example, Arabian Gulf University, would you anticipate as time goes, we'll see more, students like you, people with degrees like you coming to the States out of these local regional universities? Are they getting better and better?
Yes. So I see the way I see it is that, by the way, the Arabian Gulf University is although it's situated in Bahrain, but it takes different percentage of people from different Gulf regions. So my class had the most, I think like 70% of the entire class were Saudi. How I see the future is, like you said, the Saudi universities are right now highly ranked, like among the top universities in the world, not just the Middle East. How I see it will be is that there will be more collaborative work and more exchange programs between Saudi Arabia and different universities across the globe, and not just like locally in the Middle East. And I see it's a good thing. And yes, I do anticipate that this will help like exchanging in the exchange program. Now that you also know the people are more open to come into Saudi Arabia, hearing more about Saudi Arabia. So hearing about universities is also part of hearing about Saudi Arabia. So I think, yes, there will be more of this, but maybe differently, because as for example, in the past, if we had a gap at a certain specialty, we'd send people to universities where they had this degree or they had the specialties to fill in that gap. But it has changed, because now we have qualified people coming back, filling that gap. So the way I see it is that we will have more exchange, collaborative work than actually sending people to fill in a gap, because hopefully, well, the way I see it, which is amazing, is that we're filling all the gaps that we necessarily need to improve and like step up like the game and the whole education system, which is amazing.
Yeah. So bring us from finishing in Bahrain to Manhattan, which is a leap. Take us on that journey, how you got there, what it was like when you first got there. Tell us more about that.
It feels like yesterday. I moved to the city. I moved to the East Coast in late 2010. It was early 2011. Yeah. So I finished med school, and then so during med school, I did a lot of electives in Scotland. So because my dad is a petroleum engineer, so he's been traveling like back and forth to different regions, and Scotland was one of them. The US also was one of them. So I grew up, and I actually spent some time in Texas and different states as well. So when I was in med school, I just thought, since my dad was in Scotland, let me go and like see how the system is. And that's where I actually got my secondary exposure in research. First being in med school, I had my first exposure to research, and then in Scotland. And then so I had an idea that clinical research would be one of the specialties that I am really interested in pursuing later on. So then after graduating, I did my internship between Bahrain and also Scotland. And it was primarily also in research, clinical research. It was in both clinical electives and clinical research electives. So I got like more exposure. So that's after finishing all of that, I moved to the US. I did my medical license exam in New Jersey, and then I had started looking for programs in this area, like the East Coast, and specifically New York, to look for programs that are highly equipped with like all the top like research entities, and then Weill Cornell was one of them. So I applied and I got accepted. So I did my Weill Cornell here in New York. I did my fellowship. It was a 2-year clinical research fellowship program. And it was my very first, I'd say, intense, because it's a training position, exposure in research. And that's how the journey of clinical research started in Cornell. And now then moving from Cornell, during that Cornell time fellowship, I also got master's in clinical research from Icahn School of Medicine. That's the bridging between the two. Now, Cornell in Manhattan. So my apartment is in the middle, Cornell, and then Mount Sinai. So it was perfect. I was like, okay. So when I did my master's in Sinai while doing my fellowship in Cornell, I was more exposed to what Sinai has to offer too, in terms of clinical research. And that's when I joined Mount Sinai, specifically Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, and then started also my PhD in clinical research. That's
So you've been in
oh.
you've been in New York. You're officially a New Yorker, aren't you?
I
And
am a New
you've
Yorker.
been
I
there
am a
a
New Yorker.
decade, right? I mean,
Yes,
since
I'm a
2013.
2011.
All right.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm a New Yorker. Yeah, they say if you live here more than 10 years, you're a New Yorker. At first it was 2 years, and then they said 5 years, then 10 years. I'm like, that's it. I'm a New Yorker.
And if you can
Yep.
make it there, you can make it anywhere.
Anywhere,
And
basically.
and
Yeah.
so you're now almost done with a PhD. So Richard, it's actually
Yes.
Doctor D.
That's
A
funny.
triple
That's how
alliteration.
my
we
dad,
just
that's how my dad say too.
and I think so that means we just call you D3, all right?
D3, yeah, D cubed.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Mount Sinai has like an amazing PhD program for clinical research. Mount Sinai is recently ranked number one in the smart hospitals, top smart hospitals in New York, and then it's number 5 globally, actually. So it's their program is amazing. I've learned a lot. I've accomplished a lot.
And there's a question here, but it bridges sort of what you're doing now and what you're going to do.
Right.
Can you tell us where you're headed next? And then I want to throw in a question there.
Okay. I am headed to Riyadh. I'm going to Riyadh. I'll be joining KMARC, which is King Abdullah International Research Center in Riyadh. And it's under the national affairs, like health affairs. I'm going to do clinical research, same as I'm doing in Sinai. I'm actually excited for it because KMARC, I'll use KMARC for short, just King Abdullah International Research Center. It's one of the leading research centers in the Middle East, and even now expanding with all the affiliation and globally. So what they do is that they have similar departments as we do, even in Sinai. So they have clinical trials units, they have epidemiology, public health, they have artificial intelligence department. So I'm going to be working with them, not and like these different departments, and see where I can fit and what can I help to improve and accomplish my goals. But pretty much it's similar to what we have here in Sinai, what we have in Cornell, like of what you'd expect a research center to have. So my duties will be pretty much similar. Of course, with different goals, goals that actually align with the population, what we need the most in our region. One of the things, remember when I mentioned collaborative work between Saudi Arabia and people here? So when I was, it was last year, I think, during the pandemic, an amazing researcher from Saudi Arabia reached out. They were like working on guidelines for ICU patients, management of COVID. And we've actually published a paper. I worked with them, collaborated with tons of researchers from Saudi Arabia. And some of them are actually Saudi, but in different research centers in different countries. And we've all worked together, analyzed data, analyzed research, just to come up with guidelines and implement it in Saudi Arabia for the management of patients in the ICU for COVID. And this is just an example of what clinical research is, what collaborative work means, and how it actually affects people in the country, or patients, for example, that are in need for this kind of management. So one of the areas that are flourishing in Saudi Arabia is clinical trials, and it's one of the area that I specialize in, designing clinical trials. For example, the vaccines for COVID, how did they come about? So they manufactured a vaccine, and then they wanted to test the vaccine. If you test the vaccine on people, that's a clinical trial, right? You compare it between different groups, and you see if that vaccine works or not. The same is true for medication. The same is true for different modalities of treatment. And clinical research, this is one of the highest level of evidence. And nowadays we practice evidence-based medicine, or evidence-based science, and it's based on the evidence from science, based on research, based on data, the guidelines, the treatment that we get, the medications that we take from the pharmacies. So for us, I think to have the best out of these treatments, we want data coming from people that look like us. So data from Saudi Arabia, from the Middle East. In order for us to do that, we need clinical researchers that can design such research studies. And this is where my area come into practice, I think, in Saudi, and what I think I will I think work hard to establish. And I think also the culture of clinical research had a lot of missing information in the general public. They didn't know a lot of like, what is it? What does a clinical research mean? Is it like, am I a rat? Are you going to test something on me? And if I see someone laughing about this, I question them, because it's only natural that if you don't understand something, then you will be scared, you will question it, you will be frightened to even participate. But in order for me as a trialist, as a physician, if I want to enroll patients in this clinical trial, for example, that I designed, I want this patient to trust me. I want this patient to understand what a clinical trial is, what is a clinical research. So I think this is one of the main reasons why I actually want to also go back to Saudi, because we lack a lot of physicians who are specialized in clinical trials and specialized in clinical research, and not just practice it, but also specialized in it. So I think I want to give back to my community. I want to teach them. I want to listen to them. I want to just explain in like a very basic terms what it is to do a clinical research.
What, in terms of the national healthcare system in Saudi Arabia, where does this all fit? And are you looking to, one of the fascinating things is you're looking at large populations, and your research and your outcomes will have significant policy implications as you go forward, which I'm sure that's what you hope for.
Yes.
Because you want to make a difference.
Yes.
But how does it all fit together? The International Research Center, the National Healthcare System, do they come to policy for policy decisions and information to the International Research Center?
Yes. So, well, I don't know if you've heard about the different authorities that they've established working towards Vision 2030. So one of them was actually research development and innovation. And this
That's
ever
over
since
at,
I heard
that's over at KAUST, though. Isn't that going to be housed at KAUST?
And so no, this is a national. So the Vision 2030, they identified different goals, right? So one of the goals is under medical and outcomes for the population. So under that, there is the innovation and research, and there is a fund for nationally, not just for one hospital and not the other hospital, or one university and not. So because it's vision is for all nationally. So this is actually when I first heard this, and when I first read when they actually announced that, I got so excited. I was when I chose this specialty, I really didn't. I knew that in the future there is a need, because it all started with questions I was interested, for example, in knowing a person from Saudi Arabia. I've lost, for example, my aunt to cancer over, I think, 10 years ago, or when I was in med school. I had very basic questions how, what is the percentage, the proportion, all these questions in our society. But then there were some of the questions that they did not have answer back then. Now it's entirely different. Now you have the fund to answer these basic questions that actually help your society, help our population, and understanding what this population has, what do we need in order to advance our health, have the best outcomes. So I think having an authority that was just established for this reason, it's huge. And I think it does not only help one institute versus the other. It's just a national cause. So I think, going back to your question, where do I see myself fit into all of this? As first of all, it's very exciting. I'm very excited because it aligns with my goal and it aligns with my specialty. In order for you to understand a population, you need numbers on this population. We all know that data are the fuel right now. You need good data, and in order for you to get like good data, you have to be at the level of the population. So for me as a doctor, I see it more than just going and collecting data, but also understanding patients, understanding people that I live with, and also, in order for me to change something, I will have to do research. I will have to dig deep into these data, come up with something, understand it, and see what can I do? For example, the vaccines, when the pandemic hit, Saudi Arabia did an amazing job, did an incredible job. If we were not aware of how important data is, how important research is, Saudi Arabia would have not done what it had done, but it was aware. It was a priority. Our population is a priority, numbers are a priority, data is a priority. So this was like the end result. It went perfectly. And I think the goal is to have more of this reaction throughout my existence, or everyone's existence, I think.
So what's the timing? Like, when are you going to Riyadh? Are you going to be partially back in New York at all? Or is this a full reverse brain drain situation? America just loses you, or are you going to stay?
Oh, no. America will never lose me.
Good. Okay.
I think all countries, I think this is the beauty of working in medicine, any other specialty, actually, not just medicine, is that once your country, so I'm going back soon, hopefully this year, once I'm done with my research, once I go back, again, going back to KMRC has done a lot of agreements and a lot of collaborative work. So I'll always collaborate. So I'll be a collaborative researcher with Sinai, maybe with Cornell. So I think this will happen, like a lot of collaborative work between the two countries, specifically for me between KMRC and Mount Sinai, since I'm currently in Mount Sinai.
I'm going to do a little plug for the 966, but also because I want to talk about how Saudi Arabia is thinking big, but it's implementing. And I say that because we actually did a one big thing, one of our segments on the show a little while back, Lucian, on the Research Development Innovation Authority. It's going to be the head of CACS is going to be one of the organizing things. So, but the point is, so this is a year ago, and we thought it was really interesting because what it's trying to do is eliminate redundancies. It's trying to uniform. So you don't want Aramco working on one thing and KAUST working on the same thing, and they're not talking. So it's sort of an organizing, integrating body, which is really fascinating. So that's one thing. That's the idea. It just came into place last year, I think. But then here we are talking with you, and you're really excited about what they're bringing to the table for your reality on the ground. And I just think that's an important connection to make, because this is exactly what good policy results in. But let's go back to the pandemic and the view of science in general. One of the really impressive things about Saudi Arabia's success in every metric, said Saudi Arabia handled it as well as, top 5 country in the world, was that they followed the science. And in your experience and what you're expecting to go back, I mean, you're thinking you're going to be able to pursue it wherever it goes. Right.
Yes. So it's, again, it goes back to like, why am I doing this? Am I doing this just to get numbers and publish and convince people if they're not convinced enough? You have to be at the same level of your population. And I think it's something that Saudi Arabia has succeeded throughout the years. Like, we feel like, seriously, if you meet any Saudi, I think what you would get is that we feel we're part of, when we say community, we really mean community. When we feel that this country is home, this is how we feel it is. And I think it is because of the trust that between both the population, the government, and it had helped a lot during COVID. We saw if there is no trust, it's two parties, right? If there is no trust, then you will face problems into convincing people, for example, go get tested, get the vaccine, this is what the science says, I'm not lying. But it wasn't the case because trust was there. And I was super happy because I was here. I was in the US. I had not seen my family for over 2 years because of the pandemic. But at the same time, I wasn't very worried about my family compared to other people from different countries.
You're
I was not
right here.
I was,
Right here in the United States. I mean, you
Yeah,
talk about trust, that was missing.
right. Yeah, I think the inconsistency and the differences also between different people, but I think the majority of us back in Saudi Arabia were very trusting of the decisions. And I think number one is because we've had like really good relation with the government, and the government has like lent us like literally listening ears. And during the pandemic, they clearly communicated on a daily basis. And if like my mom, whenever I asked like my parents, how did you feel? They all knew like, oh, right now we're going to hear about this in the news. Right now we got this on our phones, like text messages. And not only they did not even communicate, not only they communicated the numbers on a national level, but city by city, like hospital by hospital, you know, those micro level, there was like clear, transparent reporting. And I think it helped a lot. And it made me super happy. I feel like I will not face this issue. Like someone might not, like I don't see me going back doing research and someone coming up to me telling me, oh, you're lying, oh, where did you get this data from? Because to begin with, we're very, very clear and transparent in communicating these matters, I think. So it makes me happy. Sorry, I talked a lot about this, but it just brings joy. I feel like research has many limitations and many obstacles, and I feel number one is not just about the resources or the capacity. It's about the trust, because you want to help people. I'm not working with objects. I'm working with people who are just like me. And I want to be on the same level. I want them to understand me. And I will understand them. I'll try to answer the question. I'm not saying that you have to be 100% convinced and say yes, but also I'll give you all my ears and I'll listen to you. I'll see where your fears are and I'll meet you there. I'll meet you there and I'll take your hand and I will help you. I'll help you understand what I do. I'll help you trust in the science that I work in and I bring to the society, just before bringing to like a hospital or that level. I think that makes me happy.
Riyadh. Have you ever lived in Riyadh?
No, I've never. I've never lived in Riyadh, but every year I go back and visit home. I try to visit Riyadh, and it's been changing. Every year I visit, it's different.
It's different almost every week now. It's changing so quickly.
That's what yeah.
So, are you excited?
I'm super excited. I am super excited. I think my personality helps too, because I love challenges. I love to like experience new city, explore. I love to explore too, so that will help. And to I'd like to understand the city better than just seeing it on the media or visiting for a day or two. And what's better way in understanding a city than actually living in the city? And moving to New York was super difficult. So so I'm assuming it's going to be way easier than
you got this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you planning to? I guess this is sort of a sidebar question, but are you planning on bringing any American friends that you've made in your 10 years in New York, 10 plus years in New York, to visit you in Saudi? Because there's really nothing like just seeing it, like you just said.
I've actually done that.
Oh, sweet.
Yes. Every year I go, and I come back. Like whenever I visit it, I come back come back to the hospital, come back to my friends. I show them pictures. I love to take pictures. I love photography, so I show them pictures because there are local pictures that you don't see on TV, right? So I show them, this is my city, this is our home, this is how it looks like. And then one of my friends actually got super excited. She was like, I'm going with you. This was before the pandemic, and she's my best friend. Like we met in Sinai. She's also a physician. She was like, next year I'm going with you. So I really didn't take her seriously. I thought, yeah, she just want to see my country. But and then pandemic hit. She was really sad. She was like, oh my God, we can't go. I'm like, oh wow, yeah, I'm sad too. So then last year, she was like, when are you going? I'm coming with you. I'm like, are you serious? So I brought her with me. We got it in no time, same day, got the visitor visa, the tourist visa, to Saudi Arabia. You can just do it online, which was amazing. And I've experienced that with her. It was so fast. She was like, oh my God, that's all? I'm like, yeah, that's all.
You get emailed 15 minutes later. That's a huge change.
Instant. It's instant. It was amazing. Like you don't go through the hustle or anything. And then she came back to Saudi with me, and it was great for both of us because she's visiting a country for the first time, and I'm also visiting cities with her for the first time that I've never been. And she loved it. She loved it. She's looking, it's funny, she's also looking to apply for a job in Saudi Arabia. Now that Saudi is becoming like a hub, you know, those big, not just Saudi, like if I talk only about Riyadh, not even talking about other cities which are amazing, just one city as an example, it became like one of the hub. Like in the past you'd hear, oh, people, like someone wants to move to New York to work in New York or Dubai, but now you hear Riyadh, Riyadh, Riyadh. So a lot of people have been asking me, like, where can we apply? What can we do? Like, does this company take foreigners? So my friend is also looking to actually work either collaboratively with a research center in Saudi Arabia or move there for a few years as well. And I'm excited.
Tell us a little bit about your photography, because you have lots of pictures out there.
I love photography. Yeah, I feel like I like documenting things. So it all started before I moved to New York, actually, when I was in Bahrain. But then when I moved to New York, it was easier. With the iPhone now, you can just like click. So and New York is different. So like you see the street life is different to where I used to live.
Lighting's different, everything's different.
Everything is different. Yeah. So I actually taught myself, and then I bought a camera. And funny thing is I used to also do photography and clinical research at Cornell. So we used to take pictures of the specimen and analyze. So it's funny how, like, now that you mentioned photography, I'm like, oh, tech thing can also work in research. That's how my mind works. Yeah. Yeah.
We'd love to, be able to include some of your images.
I have amazing. I visited Al Ula.
Oh, sweet! I'm going in 2 weeks. Yeah, that's awesome.
You'll love it. It's amazing.
Send me some recs if you would.
I will. I'll send you some recs, and I'll send you some pictures as well.
Awesome.
But you'll love it. Yeah, that's one of the cities where I took my friend to, and she loved it.
Yeah, and that's what Anya. That's some of the pictures I've seen. But yes, if we'll credit you.
Okay, not sure, but like I might charge you, but it's okay. No, just kidding.
Oh, that's totally normal royalties.
Is not enough these days. But no,
what are you going to miss most about living in New York? One of my favorite cities ever. What are you going to miss most about living there?
I think the outdoors, mostly because I don't drive here. So I love like just getting on my feet and just going anywhere I want, or taking the public transport, because everything is connected. I feel like it's small, especially like Manhattan. That's where I live, and I live right next to the river in Central Park. So like I run a lot, so I'll miss the outdoors, I think, and it's only natural because different cities have different geography and environment. So I'll miss that. I'll also miss New York bagels. But I'm not really, I think I'll miss that. I always say, yes, of course I will miss this because I am an outdoorsy person. but I think when I move to Riyadh, there will be other things that I will get to enjoy that I've not enjoyed here just because they were either not an option or maybe they were there, but I just never tried. Yeah, but
so you'll have to get used to driving a car as well again.
yeah, I do drive. So I've actually, because when I lived in Bahrain, I had my car, so I've been driving ever since. And I drive here a lot on weekends, but just not during the week.
Yeah.
And I don't mind. I'm a flexible person, so I love good challenges. I love to challenge myself. So if I feel that, and it's normal. Like if I move back, it's not going to be the same. Yes, even in the U.S., if you move between states, it's different. And New York is entirely different. It's entirely different. So I'm excited. I'm very excited to go back and maybe host you in Saudi Arabia and get to show you Riyadh. I'll be an expert by then.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. And we'd love to stay in touch with your journey and how everything's going in the future. We really appreciate the time today, Dr. Doaa. Dr. Doaa, medical doctor, physician scientist, Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. Thank you, Dr. Doaa. This was so fun. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much both for having me. This was amazing. Thank you so much.
That was our really just, we must say, terrific conversation with the very brilliant Dr. Doaa Alsaleh. Again, a reminder, you can get any of these interviews, conversations separately from the larger podcast on our YouTube channel, or you get the whole shebang as an audio podcast, wherever you're getting it. But thank you to Dr. Doaa. Safe travels. Congratulations on her second doctorate. Yep. Let's get to Yella, Richard. What do you think?
Saudi in a minute.
Yella. I can only imagine somebody listening to that when they're driving being like, whoa, the 966 has caused many traffic accidents with our ASMR.
This has been a long, exactly. Yella number one. Saudi Arabia's public investment fund maintains sixth spot among world sovereign wealth funds. With assets worth $607 billion, Saudi Arabia's public investment fund has maintained the sixth spot in the list of top sovereign wealth funds in the world, according to the Sovereign Wealth Fund Institute. Data suggested that China Investment Corp topped the list at $1.35 trillion in assets, followed by Norway Government Pension Fund Global and Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, ADIA, with assets worth $1.13 trillion and $790 billion, respectively. Kuwait Investment Authority ranks fourth with $750 billion, while Singapore's GIC Private Limited is fifth with assets of $690 billion. According to the SWF Institute data, the aggregate assets of the world's sovereign wealth funds hit $10.3 trillion by the end of 2022, up from $10.12 trillion in September 2022.
Yeah, I mean, this is amazing. The 966 Sovereign Wealth Fund has $10.1 in it right now. And we're not on the list, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, just Richard, this is cool because it's sort of officially the Sovereign Wealth Fund Institute is the paper of record, I guess, when it comes to keeping track of private equity funds and sovereign wealth funds around the world. It's sort of a paid subscription service if you want access to it. But the PIF's rise is meteoric. I mean, I think in part, and I would love your sort of take on this, I think it's because it's sort of acting, I mean, obviously it's been very active, but it acts more as a private equity fund or like a hedge fund than some of the other sovereign wealth funds, which are slower moving, more conservative in their approaches. According to the PIF website, they've got 71 companies that they've created from scratch. 13 strategic sectors, 500,000 direct and indirect jobs created. And the AUM was, and this is an older figure, but $620 billion as of Q1 2022. The PIF also has, many of them do, but the PIF also has a local development component. So they're moving quickly and, as this phrase goes, moving quickly and breaking things because they are really trying to be the main driver of Vision 2030's drive to localize tech and knowledge, and jobs. So impressive.
It really is. And yeah, you're right. You just outlined some of their their domestic focus and internal, what they're trying to do in terms of creating companies and investing internally and generate economic activity within Saudi Arabia. And we've talked about it. It's a unicorn because it's both outwards and inwards, and it's just a really unusual, seems to me, an unusual entity. It all sort of turned around since 2015 when it was refashioned. It was kind of a standard issue Saudi wealth fund investment. In terms of the SWF, just a couple. I'm just throw out a couple factoids because I think it's appropriate to the topic. So the PIS foreign exposure, and this is the big difference from 2015. The foreign exposure has surged from 9% of assets in 2017 to about 25% in 2022. So they're really, looking to invest abroad, and they become very activist investors. Over that time, and what you might expect when they're taking a more activist approach, the fund has gone from 150 billion to over 600 billion. That's 7 years. In 7 years. Another interesting thing, and this is just the last year. So in terms of, we're talking about the nature of what they're doing. So traditionally, I gather Singapore's GIC fund is usually the most active, of these top 10, globally tracked. So, it's been the most active since 2018. They invested close to 40 billion last year in 2022. Abu Dhabi investment fund, ADIA, and PIF, Saudi Arabia's investment fund, were right after them. So 2 and 3. And this is for the first time. They've never been that active. I mean, as a point of comparison, Abu Dhabi invested almost 26 billion in 22, up 140% from 2021. PIF invested 20.3 billion, up 448% from a year earlier. So, I mean, their whole portfolio, whole approach is changing. I mean, they're actively getting out in international markets and making these investments, which is obviously more risky, but obviously it gives you a greater return, which reflects their rapid growth. One more thing it might be interesting is a lot of this investment from PIF in particular is actually going to Europe and the US. So they're really ramping up their investments in Western economies. And so in terms of all the GCC funds, their investments in Western economies last year went from 22 billion in 2021 to 51 billion in 2022. So you see, they're just becoming much more aggressive, much more externally oriented, and it's exciting, probably a little scary in some ways, but it's certainly it's creating returns that have been impressive and reassuring.
Yeah, you mentioned it. The PIF's really been around for a long time. 1970, it was founded. Imagine being in the PIF in some Riyadh office in 2015, and someone comes in and says, "By the way, things are really going to start changing around here. You're not going to believe it."
It's also funny too, because there's a lot of comparisons. So you had the pandemic crash, and you had a lot of these sovereign wealth funds, Gulf sovereign wealth funds, that had oil revenue money, and and they went out and they took advantage of the depressed market, and cherry picked this and that. And it's always interesting because they compare it to 2008, the financial crisis of 2008. What did ADIA do, Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, do in 2008, and what are they doing now? And you can't do that with the PIF, because in 2008 they did nothing. They were doing nothing. They were in the conservative investments that barely ever moved every year. So they essentially didn't exist as an investment entity externally in 2008. And then you see how active they are in 2020. It's just, everything's happening so fast.
Yeah. Any active investor has hits and misses. The PIF's hits have been really amazing. I mean, it's almost like they had a crystal ball during the pandemic with some of their investments, into, Ticketmaster and Live Nation. I think they've invested in. They have so many investments now, but they were ready to go, and they deployed capital when they thought the timing was great and they could get some bargain basement prices at the beginning of the pandemic. They're really they're all over the place now. They really are. And the way that America usually hears of them is through some of their more public facing investments into Live Golf, into, sports. So, they're in sports, they're in entertainment, but they're in tourism. I mean, they're in every single, I mean, they've got a hand in pretty much everything. And that's why they are the driver of Vision 2030. And that's right to plan from the announcement. They were going to use money to invest to grow industries from scratch. That's what they're doing now.
Yeah. Speaking of, they do have hits. I mean, they've missed that 45 billion in SoftBank was not a huge success. They did back in 2017. It was one of the early ones, and you can see them learn and grow from these things.
Mm-hmm. Unlike anyone's investment into the 966 crypto coin, which it can only go one way.
Only go up. You're right. Sorry, I stepped on it.
Yella number 2. Saudi Aramco signs agreements worth $7.2 billion at the IKTVA Forum. Saudi Arabian oil company, Saudi Aramco, signed deals valued at $7.2 billion at the 7th edition of the In-Kingdom Total Value Add Forum in Tehran on Monday. The Aramco chief told the audience that the IKTVA program achieved 63% local content in 2022, up from 35% in 2015 when it was initially launched. Saudi Energy Minister Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman later said he hoped that the local content would reach 85% by 2030.
It's a big deal, and I don't know how to pronounce it. Eventually, Iktiva.
Iktiva. I didn't even try. I was like,
Iktiva. No, but the In-Kingdom Value Added Forum, and it's been a flagship thing from Aramco. It's emblematic of what Aramco is to Saudi Arabia. Aramco is, widely considered as one of the best run entities, largest, and a lot of times it's tasked with sort of driving change, and this is a big part of it. And I think they're very proud of that success. That 35% in 2015 to 63% means that's they've gone to all their suppliers, they've gone to everybody who wants to do business, and you have to do source it in kingdom, this sort of thing. It's a huge boost to local business. And I think one of the little data points is since its inception, more than 150 investments have been made within the kingdom. Including products manufactured for the very first time in Saudi Arabia. The company has also established 16 national training centers in 10 Saudi cities, covering more than 60 trades. To date, more than 48,000 Saudi nationals have graduated from these centers. So again, here's Saudi Aramco driving change at the behest of the government, but it's good change and leading to local investment, local growth, and just it's really been a success story so far. Number 3, Yella number 3, free 4-day visa introduced for Saudi Arabia air travelers. Saudi Arabia has introduced a new free transit visa allowing stopover passengers to stay in the kingdom for up to 4 days. Visitors can apply through the Saudia Airlines and Flynas websites, the Saudi press agency reported. The visa will be processed immediately. Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs introduced the visa to boost tourism, part of the Vision 2030 strategy, SPA reported.
This is amazing. We use the word amazing a lot. Richard, we have personal experience with the maturity of the visa process in Saudi Arabia.
Oh my.
I mean, you'd have to be in the dead center of the Rub al Khali with your head completely buried in the tallest sand dune to not be aware of Saudi Arabia pushing tourism these days. I mean, right now, for example, this week, Saudi Arabia announced that it would be sponsoring the FIFA World Cup. Visit Saudi would. Tourism really touches virtually every sector in the kingdom. And really is just one of the very few things that's part of almost all of the subparts of Vision 2030. But yeah, Richard, I mean, from just 5 years ago, you basically had to get either a Hajj or Umrah visa, or you had to get a business visa to get to Saudi Arabia, which was a huge pain. And now it's, from that went, 2018, when they launched the Saudi Diriyah e-Pre, and they announced, by the way, we have a new website called Visit Saudi. You can come to Saudi and just register online. And one of the more successful, national program launches that I can think of, not easy to launch a government website that handles tourist visas from a system that was older, and had no similar, establishment or legacy. And now going from basically you can't come here unless you have a specific business purpose or you're performing the Hajj or Umrah to, hey, if you buy a ticket on Saudia, you can come in for 4 days and we might even throw a free hotel room in the mix just to get you to come. I mean, that's it. That is significant change. I mean, any objective person would be like, that's a massive change.
It's insane. And just to your point, just to affirm what you're saying, not that long ago, if we wanted to go, we had to get a sponsor, a vetted sponsor in Saudi Arabia to send us an invitation, documentation written down
in Arabic.
Yeah. Take that to the embassy. And hope you can get a multiple entry and exit visa instead of just a one-timer. And how cool it is to get one for 5 years. Wow, aren't we? That was a very small group, but relatively. Yeah, and you'd go, oh my goodness, this is about to expire. I got to go do it all over again. It was a process, and it wasn't friendly, and it wasn't welcoming. And it's vastly different from what it is now. And
you skipped a few steps there as well. You had to buy the visa using Njazit, which was a system that did not take U.S. credit cards. And so that was fun to navigate. You also typically sought the help of a travel agency as well along the process. I mean, it was a huge deal.
Because the Njaz was so not user friendly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. So this is a cool. I mean, in your trips, you've been making some regular trips, and it's just like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I got the visa. This summer, and I mean, it's not just the visa, not just the process of getting the visa, and it's the arrival as well. You show up, and instead of smaller number of people servicing a huge influx of visitors. You have civilians doing that now, and the civilians are friendly. They're welcoming you to Saudi. The process is smooth. I mean, it's way faster than the United States is getting in now, unless you're global entry.
If you were a regular traveler to Saudi Arabia, and you were coming in to King Khalid, for example, and if you weren't met or expedited by somebody, and maybe you were, maybe you weren't, but if you weren't, your dread fear was that your plane would be arriving just after a large plane from Southeast Asia with a lot of expat laborers was showing up.
So that's still a thing.
Endless line. Yeah. you'd have a GCC, you'd have a Saudi, customs area where you could walk through a line. You'd have a GCC, you'd have a diplomat. And then you'd have all the rest. And if you're just, unfortunate enough, and, it's a first world problem, you can't complain about it, but it is reality. If you happen to come in after one of these, planes had arrived, you're there for, an hour, just waiting for things to get processed or more. But so anyway,
well, there was
a whole art and there were sort of, this is what you would expect if you were traveling to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. And yet you have Saudi people being the most hospitable people on the planet or close to it, maybe top 5. I don't know how to rank them, but it's just kind of overwhelming how hospitable Saudis are. But then you used to fly in and say, gosh, it's just such a pain to get in here. And yet, the opposite reception you receive as soon as you're on the other side of the airport. Now you get in and it's like, welcome to Saudi Arabia. Where are you from? It's completely different now. This is even more progress than they already made recently, which is significant. And it's cool to see, to be honest.
It reminds me, we have 2 of my kids are down south, one in Georgia and one in South Carolina. And, so when we travel south, we ended up, well, not to, but when we go to South Carolina, we end up on 85 and 95, 85, anybody on the East Coast. So 85 is just been under construction for, I don't know, maybe 300-400 years. And it's just ridiculous. And what happens is you leave the North Carolina and you go into South Carolina, and almost immediately the road is in bad shape. It's pockmarked, but it's such a bad look. You know what I mean? In terms of a state, just PR. Same thing with Saudi. back in the day, you'd come in and maybe, like I said, if you didn't have an expediter, maybe you're behind this, but it wasn't a friendly process. And by the way, they were all, everyone in customs was a male, most of them disinterested, most of them having to deal with hundreds of people every day. They're really not interested in congeniality. You go now, a significant percentage of them are women. The whole thing is streamlined. Mm-hmm. It's just a whole different experience. And so the front door is much more welcoming. And like you say, it's much more consistent with what the reality is when you're in country, which is people are very friendly and welcoming.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting too, because it's like they even have those little buttons that you see in the US all the time that have the smiley faces or the frown faces. Like, how was your experience? To even care about that is a significant change in the kingdom, and those things always amaze me, because it's like negative reviews online, like people write way more negative reviews than they do positive reviews, because if they're positive, they're just happy and they move on. If they're negative, they're upset and they want to be heard from. So just little things like that. But yeah, I mean, Richard, your ticket is your visa would have sounded completely this has got to be 50 years from now. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, just amazing stuff. Yella number 4, the Heart of Arabia explorers complete a mammoth 1,300 kilometer trek across Saudi Arabia. A team of explorers finished their 4-week, 1,300 kilometer trek across Saudi Arabia on Monday. Listeners and viewers of the 966 will know them pretty well. The Heart of Arabia expedition set off from Al Uqair on the East Coast in November and traveled by foot and camel with vehicles in support to Jeddah on the Red Sea, including a break in Riyadh in December. The route took them across the vast deserts of Saudi Arabia with hot days and bitterly cold nights, and across lava fields, muddy valleys, and steep rock faces. Quote, "It's been just brilliant, an utterly wonderful experience. We feel so grateful to have had such amazing support," said the expedition's leader, Oman-based British explorer Mark Evans. Richard, this was the 966 episode that I could not take part in because I was deathly sick upon returning from Saudi Arabia the week before. And it was so cool to listen to that as a listener. I mean, it was just such a great conversation with Reem Philby.
You're too honest. I don't even remember that. I mean, I don't remember because we've done so many and we're always in here together. So yeah, that's funny. If you hadn't mentioned that, nobody would have known. But yes, that was a black day. You felt awful.
Oh my gosh.
But it is. Sorry, are we taking you back into a dark place?
Yeah. I mean, there's some flashbacks here. some episodes you remember because you're so sick. But that was a good one. Yeah, and just really a cool conversation and really a cool mission. I mean, this is a great story.
Well, ever ahead of the curve, 966 had Alan Morrissey and Reem Philby on, and it was a fascinating discussion, and it's a really worthwhile project. And just if you want to check it out, it's heartofarabia.expedition.com, all one word, Heart of Arabia Expedition. And the expedition is also raising funds to launch the Philby Arabia Fund, which is in collaboration with the Saudi British Society, and it aims to support further exploration in the kingdom. We've already agreed with Alan and Reem and maybe Mark Evans, who's sort of the ultimate coordinator and expedition leader, to come back on the 966 and talk about their experience, because it just looked amazing. And what's fun to see is they anticipated it would be pretty spectacular and pretty awe-inspiring. It sounds as if it met and surpassed all their expectations. It's just a really meaningful, and I think it's a trip they'll remember all their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, just really cool. I do not have it in me to do something like that. So it's very admirable what they've done. It will be so cool to hear about their experiences. I imagine it being life-changing. Just really, really cool. Good for them. Good on them. And we are excited to talk with them again.
And when we have them back, we'll make sure that, you're on the show, because again, like I said, I can't, I don't even remember. I guess that's the way it works when when of 74 we've done, you've been in the trenches.
73 out of 74 is not bad.
You don't even mention the one missed.
Oh my gosh, though. I was transferring back from Riyadh through Frankfurt in Germany and then back to DC. And I almost did not make the connection in Frankfurt. I almost went to the hospital because I was just, nearly dead. So, yeah, that, and then the recovery took so long. So yeah, I'm here though. It didn't beat me. I'm only stronger now. But yeah, some flashbacks there.
Yellow number 5, visit Saudi to sponsor FIFA Women's World Cup this summer. Visit Saudi, the Gulf nation's tourist board, is set to be unveiled as a sponsor of this summer's FIFA Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand. FIFA announced in December 2021 that Visa would be its first, quote, global women's football partner, unquote, and Australia's Commonwealth Bank, CommBank, had already been named as an official supporter of the tournament. As well as including 32 teams and taking place in 2 countries for the first time, the World Cup will also have a new commercial strategy as world football's governing body attempts to capitalize on growing interest in the women's game.
Well, this has and will draw some criticism because Saudi Arabia is now reforming the rights of women in its country, but it's starting from a place where this would not be really that feasible for a commercial partnership. But I think we've heard from a lot of women, Richard, on this podcast, off this podcast, Saudi women that can personally attest to the progress of women's rights in the country. And I understand why some might be upset about this. I also maybe don't agree with it. But I think this is cool. And I think that Saudi Arabia, we just talked about it as a tourism destination. I think they want to get the word out and say, hey, this is a new tourism destination. They're going to benefit a little bit from some of these headlines that are going to be generated by this. I don't know. Pretty cool.
I love this. So you've got, so this is Visit Saudi is going to be, in the international brands like Adidas, Coca-Cola, and the aforementioned Visa. 32 team tournament, women's tournament. FIFA obviously is a big deal. I think this is like the 12th FIFA women's championship ever. The thing I really like, I digress here, but one of the most valuable things about Vision 2030, and obviously it was implemented and it launched for economic reasons. I think, as we've talked about many, many times on this show, Saudi Arabia has used economic imperative for social change. So things like, all right, if we want to reform or refashion our economy, we really can't do it if 50% of the population can't work equitably. So that's women. So you have to give them better opportunities, which means, of course, they have to have more control over their households. Which they get more rights in terms of their domestic situation. Which means, of course, by the way, they have to be able to drive to get to work. So the economic imperative has all sorts of social knock-on effects. Many of them very positive. Most of them very positive. So Saudi Arabia is going about its business, but the point I'm saying is, Vision 2030 is more than just economy. It's a mindset that I think is overtaken and is adopted and has been enthusiastically adopted by almost every Saudi, the vast majority of Saudis. Some people still, resist this change, but it's how they now see themselves. And, that identity has overtaken whatever concerns or insecurity they might have about what the world thinks of them. And my point is this: is when Visit Saudi goes out and becomes a major sponsor of FIFA, they're perfectly aware that it's going to generate all sorts of criticism. People are outraged. They're upset. They're appalled. How can Saudi Arabia be doing this when women's rights aren't the same as they are in the West? It's human rights, religious intolerance, any number of things. Some people see Saudi Arabia through one particular perspective. And the thing I like about this, and this is the point I'm getting to, is Saudi Arabia has gotten to a point in all these international events, all these international sponsorships, all these things where they're going out and investing in Newcastle or or Live or anything else, where they don't care. And it's not that they don't care. They're saying we're not going to be defined this way. We're not going to allow you to prevent us from pushing our agenda and our future and our economic well-being because you're upset with us. And I think that's a really important mindset. And it's something I can still recall when our friends would come to Saudi Arabia over the decades, and especially in post 9/11, is they're always on the back foot defensive, 9/11 or terrorism funding, real issues, or something else, women's rights, human rights, religious intolerance, but they always on their back foot, sort of being defensive, and we'll try and be responsive to your concerns. And I would say, look, try not to be defensive. You have a lot of things to talk about, and that's what you want to focus on, the positive. 2030 has wrapped all that up, made it a positive thing, adopted by the vast majority of the population. It's changed their psyche. It's changed how they look at themselves. It's changed how they look at their place in the world. And they don't have a lot of time for the criticism that people direct at them on these things that they're aware of, but they're trying to move past, and maybe they're not getting 100% right, but they're getting a lot of other things right, and that's what we want to focus on. So that's a huge discussion on FIFA, World Cup, Women's World Cup endorsements and advertising and branding. But again, I just love how they're going out and saying, look, criticize us. This is, we are clearly into supporting women's football. Look at what we've done domestically. We're trying to get, we just had our first international. We're trying to get a FIFA rating. We've got new leagues for women. We're building the sport domestically. This is a natural follow-on to that. Criticize us all you want. We're going to do it.
Yellow number 6, Canoe, Go EV, is bringing its EVs to Saudi Arabia with a new exclusive distributor partnership. Go EV is making good on its promise to bring EVs to everyone with a new distributor partnership that will expand its network to Saudi Arabia. The young EV maker has had its fair share of ups and downs since its foundation in 2017. Canoe was started by 2 former Faraday Future FFIE employees and has been one of the most closely watched electric vehicle makers after going public on the NASDAQ exchange in 2020 under the ticker GoEV. Well, there you go. I just got to read the whole thing, and there it is, GoEV. Okay, so that's their ticker. Interesting.
Have you seen one of these?
No, I haven't.
It's kind of cool. I haven't seen it.
What does it look like?
I'm talking pictures of it. It's very. They actually market themselves as a loft on wheels. It's a ground up refashion of everything's functional, everything's different, so it ends up being pod like, and they have various models of it: expedition, luxury, this sort of thing. I think it starts about 40,000. But I say that because it's really an interesting lineup that Saudi Arabia is sort of getting. So you've got Lucid, obviously, which has its own proprietary, certainly battery type, but it's a standard sedan. It's a beautifully well-designed sedan. So it's, classic automobile, recognizable automobile, but an EV. Then you've got Sear, which is a joint venture with Foxconn, and that's really, a lot of that is batteries and electrical and that sort of thing. So we don't know what that's going to look like. That's true joint venture with Saudi Arabia. Hyundai came on. And by the way, Lucid is right now is just an assembly only. Eventually, they want to be in a production and manufacturing, but it's assembly only. Hyundai, same thing. They just did a memorandum with them to do a completely knockdown vehicles, both internal combustion engine and EV. And now you got Canoe, clearly EV. And of the 4, Canoe is really a unique vehicle, and you could see it being utilized in some capacity, especially in transport fleets and that sort of thing. It's because it's kind of like it's called a multi-purpose platform, but it's kind of like they can do it in delivery vans, lifestyle vans, that sort of thing. But kind of cool. And again, they're just really, really going hard into the automotive sector and building things. And the other interesting thing is Canoe's doing it with Oleon, and Oleon, tremendous experience with marketing and relationships. I mean, the Oleon sales service people are going to work with Canoe. It's been around since 47, has dealt with SUVs, sedans, pickups, everything for decades upon decades. So it's a really promising kind of thing.
I can't imagine an unsexier.
Did you get a picture?
I'm looking at it right now. It is like the least cool looking car I've ever seen in my life. Yeah. Showing up for a first date and you show up in one of these things. It looks like a eggplant. It looks like
on four wheels.
Egg. Yeah. I mean, on four wheels. There's a box version of it. But also feeling really bad for any people who bought the IPO of the stock at $20 a share, because it is now down to $1 a share, which means maybe now is a good time to buy. This is not a program that provides investment advice, but I know a low value when I see one. But this is cool. All the jokes aside, this is cool.
Yeah, no, and they got $1 billion, and they have 200, invested in $1 billion and have 250 patents, and they had a lot of, mojo, and they're running out of cash. But I guess they lost 125 million in the first quarter of 2022. So yeah, this may be another buy low. It's another. Saudi Arabia's always looking for opportunities, and if Canoe, thinks they can have a lifeline coming to Saudi Arabia doing EVs, and that's more to that sector for Saudi Arabia. But I do think it's interesting because it's unlike Lucid or Sear, which doesn't have a vehicle that you can see attached to it, or Hyundai, which is based on an existing platform. All very cool. Canoe is kind of like a ground up reimagining of an electric vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, I could be all about this, Richard. If like when we get to driverless, like full driverless, I'm not going to want to sit in a normal car. I'm going to want like a moving trailer, essentially, where I can move around and maybe have some chairs facing different ways, because you're going to be sort of sitting there not doing anything. So you're going to want the car to be kind of reimagined.
100%.
If my family gets any bigger, this is going to start looking like a viable car.
Well, but it's also interesting, and this is what we're dads, and we have a family, and I'm looking at the interior. I'm going, well, this is really cool, and look at all that open seating and stuff. But I'm going, where's the storage space? There's no trunk to speak of. What do? Just pile all your kid crap and everything else in that open area right in the middle? Do you know what I mean? Because I think that the electrical, the battery and everything is up front, but I'm going, where do you store stuff? Yeah. I mean, you have room for the kids, you have room for 2 up front, 3 in the back, and nice big open space, like you say, pretty cool in a driverless vehicle. But what about you do all the crap that you have to move around?
Yeah, I mean, aesthetically, I personally like older cars. But I mean, not in terms of performance or anything. And so I'm looking at this thing, and yeah, the truck looks okay. And, this just seems more like a people mover kind of van, like you have, and so, exactly. Richard, great episode today. Thank you so much to Dr. Doaa Alsaleh, who will soon be a double doctor. With a great conversation with her. We'll be back next week with a full episode. Hopefully my voice comes back a little bit. It's been a long day already, and I'm going to get longer. But Richard, this is a great episode 74. Thank you so much.